Before clocks, before calendars etched their tidy grids upon the day, there was the sea, vast, patient, speaking in a language older than words. It did not measure time. It breathed it. Each swell was an inhalation, each retreat an exhale, and in that endless breathing the world learned its first lullaby. The path inland was made not of stone but of memory. Each step pressed faint ripples into the soil, as if the ground itself remembered being seabed once, long ago, before mountains were ambition and rivers were instructions. The sea had taught the soul to keep time the way a shoreline keeps footprints, accepting, releasing, never counting the same print twice. Yet before returning to the water, the soul walked a slower road, the kind that curves through orchards and chapels of wind, where time's memory hangs like fruit no one rushes to pick. The morning was a gentle hush after rain. Leaves carried a language of small brightnesses. Every drop on every blade of grass seemed to say, "I was sky. I still remember." The soul listened. In its hands remained the gifts of the coast: blue glass, frayed rope, mended shell, now darkened slightly by use, as tools should be. The village had learned a new tempo, and the soul had learned the old craft of listening until listening becomes prayer. A footpath branched away from the road and climbed the hill where the horizon rehearsed forever. There, a tower stood without a clock, stone, ivy, a bell that preferred silence to false urgency. Wind touched the bell's rim and made a tone so gentle it barely qualified as sound. The soul sat on the steps. Rest has its own grammar, and stone speaks it fluently. "You came back," said a voice within the wind. "I never left," the soul answered, "because the sea teaches that distance can be only another name for rhythm." From behind the tower stepped a woman with hands dusted in flour, apron tied, hair pinned in a way that suggested competence without vanity. "I bring bread to the tower each morning," she said, offering a small loaf. "The bell doesn't eat, but I leave it anyway. The day is kinder when I do." The soul broke the bread, and steam rose like a modest blessing. "What is this tower called?" "The Archive of Hours," she replied. "Not the hours we spend, but the hours that spend us, the ones that change our shape." She tilted her head toward the open arch. "Go in. It remembers." The archive was a round room with narrow windows and shelves that held only bowls. Each bowl had been carved from a different tree: olive, ash, apple, walnut, and each bowl held water. Some waters were clear, some were green, one was the kind of dark that contains starlight. The air smelled faintly of cedar, and of decisions made slowly enough to be trusted. "What are these?" asked the soul. "Moments," came another voice, older and quiet, from a shadow near the wall. An elder emerged with eyes like small harbors where small boats know they may dock. "Not events, temperatures of attention." He gestured to a bowl that caught the window's light. "Here is the day a father set down his tools and watched his child sleep for as long as the child slept. Here is the hour a widow cooked soup and ate it at the table alone, yet not lonely." He pointed to a dark bowl in which something shimmered like patience learning to walk. "Here is a night a city learned to whisper." The soul bent over the bowls and saw how water remembers without keeping score. Each surface trembled when breath neared, then stilled, as if to say, "You are not separate from what you see." In the green bowl a memory rose, the village square washed by rain, rope jeweled with dew, the old man's hands cupping the mended shell. The scene widened to include the invisible, the tone of relief, the courage that happens without announcement. The soul felt the memory return not to mind but to body, like warmth remembered by hands on a winter morning. Why bowls? The soul asked. Because time is a liquid, said the elder. When you hold it like a stone, it bruises the hand. When you hold it like water, it teaches you its shape. He placed a palm on the rim of an empty bowl and smiled. And when you set down the bowl, it keeps reflecting until the light changes, which is its version of gratitude. The woman set the bread on a sill and left, the way morning leaves, present even when gone. The elder led the soul to a spiral stair descending to a room beneath the tower. There, on a low table, a map lay open. It showed no borders, only currents. Blue threads, white arcs, pale loops like sighs. This is not where places are, the elder said, but how they move through each other. Rivers, winds, the routes of migrating birds, and the footpaths of those who walk slowly for a reason. He placed the soul's hand on the map. You came along this line, a road shaped like a question that learned to accept being answered gently. The soul traced the line and felt faint vibrations of footsteps taken with care. I need to return to the sea, it said softly. There is a promise waiting by the warden of hours, and the moon is a precise friend. Go then, said the elder, but carry a bowl. He selected one carved from apple wood, simple, wide-mouthed, unassuming. Not to fill, he added. To remember you are not empty when you are quiet. The soul bowed and took the bowl. Climbing to light, it paused at the threshold. On the lintel, hand-carved, were 4 words. Begin gently, return gently. The soul lifted the bowl in a small salute. The wind approved by lifting only enough dust to make a sentence visible in the sun. Down the hill and across the meadow the soul walked. A woman hanging laundry took a clothespin from between her lips and smiled with her whole face, as if recognizing a visitor she had met in a childhood she hadn't been born into. A shepherd raised a hand without shouting. Sheep, convinced by nothing, believed in the day. Fields flashed their stubble like silver writing. The soul breathed as a shoreline breathes, and the road breathed back. Where the path dipped into trees, the air cooled and the light gathered itself into smaller pieces, as if practicing to be stars. A brook threaded through, chattering not to be interesting but to be honest. The soul knelt and lowered the applewood bowl into the water. The bowl floated, filled itself, and kept floating. When the soul lifted it, the bowl was heavier and the world was lighter. I am carried, the water seemed to say, and the soul believed it. The forest thinned. Ahead, the estuary opened, a wide mouth where river speaks sea. The tide was leaning in, persuasive without insistence. Mud flats held herons at the angle of patient intention. Reeds whispered like neighbors in love with the same weather. The soul stood at the edge where fresh and salt are not rivals but a marriage of differences. Teach me the word between, it whispered. You already know it, said a voice that was neither river nor sea but both. It is breath. The current rose to meet the soul, a familiar pressure around the ankles. A conversation resumed without embarrassment. You have carried well, it said. The village has put down its stones and learned to hold bowls. They taught me too, the soul answered. To echo, to stay, to leave slowly. It lifted the applewood bowl and poured the forest water back into the estuary. The water did not hurry to become salt. It unfolded itself without violence, like truth admitted in a safe room. Beyond, the warden of Hours Island stood like a punctuation mark that prefers commas to periods. The tide was high enough to erase the hardest parts of the path, which is one of the ways mercy keeps appointments. The soul waded across, sand cool as reason, water warm as welcome. On the island, The tower breathed its long exhale of stone. The door offered its hinge the way a host offers a chair. In the high room the hourglass of light continued its unhurried reversal and return, falling upward, rising downward, obeying a gravity named kindness. The elder who had tended it was not there. The glass did not mind. It needed only witness. The soul placed the blue glass beside the eastern window to smile the morning into a paler blue. It tied the frayed rope along the western sill to remind sunset that connection endures beyond view. It laid the mended shell beneath the northern slit, where winds brought questions to be listened to, not solved. The tower accepted these offerings with the composure of someone who has hosted many small truths and never exhausted their chair supply. "Do you ring?" the soul asked the silent bell. "Only when asked by something larger than noise," the bell replied, in a tone too low for ears but perfect for bones. Dusk gathered on the water like ink being thoughtful. The moon lifted, modest and attentive. The sea, feeling the exactness of her pull, adjusted its hem. The soul stood at the tower window and let its breath be a tide the size of a chest. The current threaded through the strait, stroked the stones, braided eddies that would untie themselves by morning. "Come," said a different voice from the stair, a voice that sounded like slate becoming path. A figure entered, cloaked in grays and blues, wearing the kind of hat weather respects. Their face had the calm of a person who keeps lighthouses in their pockets. "I am the archivist of slowness," they said, as if introducing a friend you would meet again and again. "Walk with me." They walked the island's edge where rocks practice dignity and barnacles practice devotion. "People think eternity is far away," said the archivist. "But distance is sometimes just impatience wearing a map." They pointed to the tide line where seaweed wrote curling sentences that changed every hour. "Read." The soul read aloud, "Arrive/wait/learn/return." "Good," said the archivist. "Add one more word." The soul listened outward, inward, to the between. The added word came like a boat whose oars knew the way without needing eyes. "Offer." The archivist smiled. "Yes, offer is how the tide keeps its manners. It does not seize the shore, it proposes to it." They stopped where a small pool had formed between three stones. In the pool a star had come down to see itself. "If you look only at the sea," the archivist said, "you will believe everything is large. If you look only at the pool, you will believe everything is small. Look at both, and your heart finds its true size." They stood without counting minutes. Night laid a shawl over the island and decorated it with lamps. Far away, a ship moved like a sentence that refuses to hurry. The bell did not ring. It did not need to. "Tomorrow," said the archivist, "you will walk the tidelands at first light. The sands remember what the waters ask of them. They have a map written in ripples. Follow where the ridges point when the gulls argue about nothing." "What will I find?" "What you are ready to keep," the archivist said, "and what you are ready to return." They left the soul to the companionship of stars. Sleep came the way the tide comes to a patient harbor, glad to be known, unafraid to leave. In its dreams the soul walked corridors made of shorelines. One side water, one side wind, underfoot a logic written by moons. The doors did not lock. The windows did not judge. All the rooms used the same word for welcome. Dawn arrived behind the eyes. The soul rose and descended to the sand while the light was still deciding what to be. Low tide had lettered the flats with ridges like a hymn written in braille for feet. Where the gulls quarreled, the marks pointed southwest. The soul followed, stepping where water had recently performed its gentle arithmetic. At the far curve of the island, the sand widened into a quiet. There lay a scatter of gifts the sea leaves for those who come when it is not trying to be spectacular. Driftwood shaped like a question mark that has forgiven itself for not being an answer, a knot of rope the color of old storms, a bottle with no message except the green of its glass, 2 stones that had become boring enough to be beautiful. Among them, half buried, something shone not like metal but like memory polished by many palms. The soul brushed aside sand and lifted a small instrument, no longer than a hand, a tidal compass. On its face, not directions but verbs: arrive, notice, weigh, offer, return, and a needle that turned not to north but to the nearest kindness. The compass hummed with a softness that traveled from fingers to ribs. The soul held it and felt its own breath align with the hinge between inhale and exhale. "Keep it," said the current, rising in a crescent around the ankles. "It points to the next useful gentleness." "What of the village?" asked the soul. "They will write their own compasses," the current replied. "You gave them slowness. Slowness breeds instruments." Footprints approached along the tittle-line, fresh, human, unafraid. The baker from the hill tower appeared, carrying a small basket. "I bring what I bring," she said, "and the tide brings what it brings." She handed the soul a still warm roll and a folded paper tied with string. "The elder asked me to give you this." The paper was a map of words, drawn with a hand that trusted silence to complete sentences. "Where the river meets the mind, listen. Where the wind meets the ear, wait. Where generosity meets attention, anchor." At the bottom, a line: "Begin gently, return gently." "I will," said the soul. The baker touched 2 fingers to the blue glass set now on the tower wall and nodded, as if greeting an old colleague. "The village is calmer," she said, looking toward the mainland. "The clocks seem taller because no one bends their neck to worship them. Children walk home by longer routes." She smiled. "We bake slower. The bread forgives us." The tide turned, as it always does, admitting the pull of something faithful beyond sight. The soul gathered the 3 gifts and the tidal compass, placed the applewood bowl upon the water, and watched it ride the thin, clean swell toward the strait. "I will come back," the soul told the island. "You always do," said the stones, in the voice that stones use when they approve of the living. At the tower, the bell considered and then remained silent. Silence was sufficient. The hourglass of light continued its soft reversal. The moon, pale and practical in daylight, signed the margin of the morning with a faint white note. The current widened, welcoming without ceremony. The soul stepped into the water and felt its weight remembered as buoyancy. As the tide lifted the ankles, the calves, the knees, the soul felt the knowledge from the archive of hours descend through its body and take the form of motion. Practice had become gait. Insight had become balance. The sea was not a destination. It was the grammar of all destinations. The island receded until it became what all good teachings become. Not scenery, but posture. Ahead, the horizon practiced being infinite without boasting. Beneath, seagrass wrote its slow, green cursive. Above, a cormorant arrowed through the air and landed where the water learned to welcome wings. The tidal compass trembled, then pointed, not toward shore, not toward deep, but toward a widening inside the chest that felt like a door left open on purpose. The soul smiled. It had remembered something the sea never forgets. Eternity does not lengthen time. It sweetens it. It does not stretch the hour. It fills the bowl. And so the soul drifted with intention, carrying the gifts not as talismans but as verbs that had learned to be nouns. The tide of eternity rose and fell, changed its mind without changing its promise, and in that reliable breathing, the world felt itself accompanied. Thank you for listening to Sleep with Myth. Beneath the surface, the sea was not dark but deep, a cathedral of motion, every column of light a psalm sung in liquid silence. The soul descended slowly, each breath aligning with the rhythm of the tide, each heartbeat an echo of something older than the world. The water thickened into color, indigo, then violet, then the hue of sleep before dreaming. Faint motes of brightness drifted, each one a fragment of memory too heavy for air but light enough for water. Where am I? The soul asked, though speech had become thought, and thought had become current. In the still between, answered a voice that belonged to no mouth. You have learned to move. Now you will learn to wait. The sea gathered itself around the soul, not as pressure but as presence. It hummed, a tone below hearing, like a cathedral remembering a hymn. Movement is easy, the voice continued. Even grief moves. But waiting, true waiting, requires faith that time does not abandon. The soul drifted downward, through forests of coral shaped like listening hands. Fishes moved in solemn procession, their scales flashing slow light. A whale passed in the distance, her shadow vast and tender. She carried songs older than calendars. Why must I wait? The soul asked. Because eternity is not a rival, said the sea. It is the patience that lets everything arrive. The descent ended in a plain of pale sand, rippled like parchment where a careful scribe had written with water. Here stood stones, each inscribed by the tide with the gentlest alphabet, a script of curves and pauses, of commas instead of periods. The soul knelt. The sand breathed once and stilled, as if pleased to be noticed without being improved. What is this place? The eternal depths, said the sea, where beginnings sleep beside their endings without needing to argue about which is which. The soul listened. Far above, the surface simmered with sun. A rumor kept politely distant. Down here, a different light prevailed, patience made visible. The soul unclenched the hand it hadn't known was a fist. The water approved by loosening, becoming wider around the ribs. Teach me, the soul said. Then place your gifts here, the sea replied. The soul laid the blue glass, the frayed rope, the mended shell upon the sand. Each settled with a faint sigh, like tools recognizing a bench. Silvery silt rose and fell. From behind a low ridge, something approached. A current braided of 3 smaller streams, each a different temperature. It moved like a question that already trusted the answer. I am the keeper of pauses, said the current. Everything durable was once carried by a pause. It touched the glass, and the sea's light bent through it, softening edges that had never been sharp. Clarity without hurry, murmured the keeper. It touched the rope. The fibers swayed together, each strand aware of the others. Connection without demand. It touched the shell. Faint music uncoiled, not a melody but the possibility of one. Beauty returned from breaking, the grammar of forgiveness. The soul bowed. I learned these above, and now you will learn them below, said the keeper. So they will hold even when light is scarce. Around the plain doors appeared, not doors in walls but doors in water, frames of cooler current, hinges of eddy. Through each the sea showed a room where waiting was working. In one, a seed rested in soil so dark it shone, and the room smelled like earth considering spring. In another, A mother held a feverish child and breathed slowly until the child's breath imitated hers. Nothing else changed, and everything changed. In a third, a musician stared at a silent instrument and let the silence be the teacher. Later, when sound returned, it arrived clean and unafraid. "You see," said the keeper of pauses, "waiting is not absence. It is the presence that refuses to rush." A school of lanternfish drifted through, carrying their own lamps like small remembered promises. The soul watched the way their light did not compete with the dark. It conversed with it. "How long will I remain?" the soul asked, not from impatience, but so that its heart could set the table for the right number of guests. "Until the surface forgets to worry about you," the sea replied. "Then you will rise without effort. But before you go, you will visit the archive that waits below all other archives." The keeper of pauses led the soul along a ridge where sand fell away in scarves. They came to a cave whose mouth breathed tide. Inside, shelves had been carved by waves that practiced their calligraphy for centuries. Instead of scrolls, the shelves held vessels. Cups, bowls, broken amphorae mended in veins of pearl. The water within them did not slosh. It remembered. "The archive of kept vows," said the keeper. "Not the vows declared loudly, the ones kept quietly." The soul touched a cup and knew. A worker who never cut corners even when no one watched. A bowl. A neighbor who watered a plant in the window of a stranger who had gone away and would return to find green gratitude waiting. An amphora, mended. Two people who broke the same promise to each other until they learned to make a softer promise and keep that one instead. "These," said the keeper, "make time sweet." The soul lingered by a small chipped bowl sealed with a thread of nacre. Within lay still water with a single seed asleep in it. "What vow is this?" "To try again," said the sea, and the softness of the words turned the soul toward its own depths. "Some nights that vow is the only one eternity requires." They left the archive and returned to the plain. The stones had rearranged themselves into a circle, not to trap, but to hold. In the circle's center, the soul's gifts gleamed. The blue glass had learned a quieter blue, the rope a kinder sway, the shell a deeper stillness. "Take them," said the keeper, "but know they have become the depths' versions of themselves." The soul gathered the gifts. They felt unchanged in the hand and transformed in the heart. The blue glass now taught sight to touch. The rope braided solitude into community. The shell kept music that would wait forever rather than arrive rudely. "Before you rise," the sea said, "learn to listen to what does not ask to be heard." The soul closed its eyes. There, at the edge of discernment, a tremor of rhythm. Not the pulse of blood, not the roll of waves, but the grain of being itself. It sounded like a lullaby hummed by stone, like starfields shifting politely to accommodate a prayer, like the word welcome, spoken by an empty chair. The soul leaned into it until leaning became belonging. When the soul opened its eyes, the whale had returned. She hovered just beyond the ring of stones, a mountain considerate enough to bring its own horizon. From her flukes, spirals of plankton curled like script. "I know that song," the soul said, though no sound had broken the water. "You learned it before you had a mouth," the whale answered. "It is the hymn of endurance. Would you like to practice?" The soul nodded and sang without singing, a vibration barely larger than intention. The whale answered. The sea harmonized, and the plain of sand wrote the music down in braille that only tides can read. When the last note returned to the first, nothing had changed and everything had softened. "You are ready," said the sea. The surface has forgotten to worry. Rise. The ascent was not a flight but a remembering. The water warmed shade by shade. Colors woke from their long nap. The far brightness thickened into day. The soul carried the quiet upward as if balancing a bowl filled to the lip. Steady, attentive, unhurried. When it broke through, the sky did not shout. It sighed with relief and placed a hand of wind against the soul's cheek as if to say, I kept watch for you. I knew you were still here. The sea lay before the soul like a page that writes itself and asks only to be read slowly. The island of the Warden of Hours stood a little way off, patient as ever. On its roof, the bell did nothing elegantly. The soul floated, felt the pulse of the tide around its ankles as if the sea were measuring not time but tenderness. Will you send me back? The soul asked. To the village? To the roads where clocks still try to teach fear. Soon, the sea said. But first you must learn the right of waiting by. Not waiting for, which is impatience in a mask. Waiting by, which is presence unafraid to be ordinary. Clouds passed overhead like thoughtful ships. The soul listened to the small waves polish the stones. A craftsperson's rhythm. It drifted to the island and climbed onto the sand. The titterline had left a thin braid of wrack, amber and olive, decorated with gulls' footprints that resembled quotation marks around a sentence the day was about to speak. On a flat rock, a figure sat with their feet in water, the archivist of slowness. They held a length of driftwood and a knife, making a spoon the way some people make patience. Sit, they said without looking up, not unkindly, as one invites someone already at ease. The soul sat. What is waiting by? The archivist shaved a curl from the wood and let it fall. The art of keeping company with what is not yet ready. The sea practices it on the shore on the sea. The moon practices it on the clouds, and the clouds on the roofs of towns. Do you know how to be near without needing to fix? I am learning, the soul said. Then begin here. The archivist pointed down the beach where a narrow inlet had stranded a small boat. Its keel sat on sand. Its eyes, for boats have eyes, looked embarrassed. Go and do not rescue. Accompany instead. The soul walked to the boat and placed a hand upon the gunwale. I see you, it said. The boat made the quiet creek boats make when they have been too lonely and are surprised by gentleness. I am stuck, the boat confessed. You are, said the soul. And soon you will not be. The tide is honest. They waited by. The incoming water drew lines closer, closer. Small crabs practiced sideways truths at their feet. A heron stood nearby, the genius of stillness. The boat sighed at every finger of water that reached and retreated. It feels like teasing. It is rehearsal, said the soul. The sea is remembering the exact shape of your weight. At last a larger swell entered the inlet, and the boat lifted half a breath. The soul kept its hand in place, not to push, but to remind the wood that rising is allowed. Another swell, higher, and the boat floated entirely. It did not rush. It swiveled slowly, found its bow, and faced the opening. The soul stepped back. Thank you, said the boat, before the water carried it toward the work it was built for, holding journeys without owning them. See, said the archivist, who had watched without overseeing. Waiting by is the oldest tide. Afternoon leaned its gold upon the water. In the tower, the hourglass of light fell upward and downward with the confidence of someone who has made peace with paradox. The soul, the archivist, and the sea shared a silence that was not empty but furnished with attention. Hear a bird's call, there a ropes creak, hear the patient scrape of a crab writing history with its feet. When shadows learned their evening shapes, the moon rose modest and exact. Her pull wrote white paths along the dark water. You have learned to descend, to wait, to rise, and to wait by, she said. Now you will carry the deep into the shallow without insisting anyone drown to understand you. How? Asked the soul. By living as a tide among hours, said the moon. Stand where arrivals happen and teach them to enter gently. Stand where departures happen and teach them to leave as offerings, not as theft. The soul stood. Its gifts, the blue glass, the rope, the shell, seemed to hum in agreement with the hour. The tidal compass warmed in the palm, the needle steady toward the next gentleness. On the horizon, lights of the mainland flickered like a constellation that had come down to learn about bread and keys and doorways and beds. Go, said the sea. The soul stepped into the water and began to move. Not fast, not slow, the speed of trust. Behind, the island practiced being both here and elsewhere. Ahead, a village that had learned to loosen waited to learn to endure. Above, the moon pulled. Below, the deep carried. Within, the still between kept its quiet chair. The tide lifted. The tide set down. Breath returned the world to itself. And eternity, which does not hurry, did what it always does when invited. It sweetened the hour. The soul returned to the shore at the hour when light and mist cannot agree which of them is more real. The sea whispered behind, steady and forgiving, as if saying, Go, but do not forget the language you learned here. The sand was cool. The air tasted of salt and possibility. Every breath still carried a slow rhythm, the same rhythm that moved tides and dreams alike. The soul stepped inland once more, toward the sleeping village where time now walked barefoot. Along the road, the world looked changed, not because it was, but because the soul had learned to see it gently. The trees bowed without losing dignity. Stones remembered to glimmer. Even silence felt like a companion with something kind to say. The soul carried the gifts, the blue glass, the rope, the shell, and the tidal compass, which hummed quietly toward the nearest act of grace. Its needle trembled not for direction but for intention. It pointed now toward smoke rising softly from chimneys. The village stirred. Dawn was a pale bowl of milk, and the people began to wake as if they had already been halfway dreaming. Children stretched their arms, remembering something vast and bright. The baker opened his door. He saw the soul approaching and smiled in the slow, certain way that bread rises. The sea has returned in you, he said. The soul nodded. And in you, it has learned warmth. The baker gestured inside. Come. There is bread still warm enough to remember fire. Inside the bakery, the air was thick with the perfume of simplicity, flour, wood smoke, and patience. The baker placed a loaf on the table. His crust crackled like laughter finding its courage. You taught us to listen, he said, but the waiting, that we learned ourselves. The soul broke the bread. Steam rose like a hymn. Waiting is love wearing silence, it said. Outside, the morning gathered. People emerged into the square. The fountain still glimmered blue from the glass placed there long ago. A new rope hung between two trees, braided by many hands. The mended shell had been built into the wall beside the well. When wind passed through it, a faint song echoed, part ocean, part breath, part memory. The teacher approached, her eyes soft with awe. We have learned to measure our days differently, she said. Not by hours, but by kindness. The clocks still tick, but they no longer lead, they accompany. The soul smiled. That is how the tide moves. Beside, not ahead. A child tugged at the soul's sleeve. "Will you stay?" "For a while," the soul said. "Long enough for the tide to rest." Weeks passed, but they did not feel like weeks. Time had loosened into a long and generous sigh. The soul helped the people tend their gardens, repair roofs, carry water. It did not lead, it listened. When someone was tired, it taught them to breathe with the rhythm of the sea. When someone was angry, it taught them to pause until the emotions softened into a tide going out. One evening, as the sun rested low on the horizon, the villagers gathered around a fire. Flames bent with the wind, painting everyone in gold and bronze. The old man from the fountain spoke first. "I used to fear that I had wasted time," he said. "But now I see time was never mine to waste. It was mine to feel." The soul nodded. "Feeling is the way eternity touches skin." A silence followed, not empty, but deep. Children leaned on their mother's shoulders. The baker passed pieces of bread. The teacher hummed an old melody that the shell had once sung through the wind. Above them, the stars awakened like lanterns remembering duty. The sea's sound carried faintly across the fields. Later that night, when the fire had dimmed, the soul walked to the hill overlooking the village. The tidal compass glowed faintly in its palm. The needle now pointed neither east nor west, but upward, toward something that could not be charted. From the distance came a figure walking along the road, a shape familiar, woven from twilight and direction. It was the current, the guide who had led the soul into the sea long ago. "You have brought the deep into the shallow," said the current. "I only reminded them of what they already knew," replied the soul. "That," said the current, "is the highest form of teaching." They stood together in the quiet, watching how moonlight turned roofs into silver islands. "Will you go back?" asked the current. "Yes," said the soul, "but not as I came. I will not leave them behind." The tide remembers everything it touches. The current placed a hand of water on the soul's shoulder. "Then you are ready for the next shore." At dawn, the sea mist rolled inland, soft as breath. The villagers woke to find the soul walking toward the coast. No one called out. They understood that goodbyes spoken too loudly disturb what is sacred. The baker watched from his doorway, his hands folded as though in prayer. The child left a seashell on the road, whispering, "Come back in the rain." The soul reached the beach. The water was calm, wearing the color of forgiveness. The moon's reflection still lingered in its folds. "You have been both wave and shore," said the sea. "You have learned to arrive, to wait, to offer, and to return. Now you will learn to be carried." The soul stepped forward. The tide met its ankles, its knees, its chest, each level a memory revisited. When the sea closed over its shoulders, it felt not drowned but held. Downward the soul drifted again, but this descent was different. It felt like coming home through a door left open by kindness. At the threshold of the deep, the whale waited once more. Her eyes were constellations. "You carried time gently," she said. "Now time will carry you." The soul bowed. "I will remember." "You already do," said the whale and turned, leading the way into the open blue. There, beneath all sound, the sea began to sing. The music was not melody, it was structure. It was how light moved through water, how hearts aligned with tides, how galaxies breathed in the dark. The soul saw visions passing in the song. A mother rocking her child through sleepless hours. A painter leaving a canvas unfinished because beauty had already arrived. A stranger offering water to another on a road without asking why. "These," said the sea, are the tides within people. They never dry. The soul understood that the ocean was not merely outside the world. It lived inside every pulse, every inhale, every moment that dared to be kind. A thought rose like a bubble. Then eternity is not the endless. It is the enough. Yes, whispered the sea. And you have remembered. The soul closed its eyes. Around it the deep shimmered. He rope coiled and uncoiled. The blue glass shone softly, and the mended shell sang a note so pure it could calm the restless stars. When the song ended, silence began, but silence here was alive. It pulsed like a heart too vast to be named. Somewhere far above, morning broke. The villagers stood by the shore, listening to the waves. They could not see the soul, but they felt something. An ease in their breathing, a rhythm returning to their bodies. The old man smiled without reason. The baker felt his dough rise perfectly. The child whispered to the sea, "Thank you." And the sea answered, not with sound, but with motion. The tide came in gentle, bright, complete. And so it was that eternity, having taught its lesson in silence and return, continued its patient breathing through every heart that had ever listened. Thank you for listening to Sleep with Myth. At the edge of dawn, where the world forgets to divide sky from sea, the soul drifted between. There was no more surface, no more depth, only a great breathing wholeness. Every wave folded into another, and time itself softened like salt dissolving in light. The sea spoke, not in words but in rhythm, and the rhythm said, "You are home." The soul did not answer. It simply listened, for listening was the highest form of prayer. Around it, life stirred in endless forms, whales carrying the moon's reflection across black water, coral blooming in colors only patience could invent, clouds mirroring their shapes below. Each thing, from smallest plankton to largest current, moved according to the same invisible pulse. The tide that never ends, the heart of eternity itself. The soul had once believed eternity was distance. Now it understood it was intimacy stretched wide enough to hold everything. As the light of morning deepened, the soul felt its boundaries begin to change. Skin became shimmer, breath became current, thought became tide. "I am dissolving," it said softly. "You are expanding," whispered the sea. "You were never meant to stay one shape." The sea carried the soul through caverns of light where memory glowed like lanterns hung beneath the world. Each memory shone briefly, then blended into the next. Faces, laughter, silence, the long thread of kindness that tied them all together. The soul realized it had never been apart from any of them. A vision appeared, a village bathed in gold. Children played beside the fountain. The baker laughed as he dusted flour from his hands. The teacher closed her eyes to feel the wind. Every heart moved to the rhythm the soul had once carried inland. Now they carried it themselves. "They do not need me," said the soul. "They never did," said the sea. "But they will always remember you in the rhythm of their breathing." The soul watched as the tide reached the village's edge, not to flood, but to greet. It lapped against the stones like a memory visiting gently. The villagers stood together, hands linked, as if in gratitude for something they could not name. And in that moment, the soul felt love not as emotion but as structure, the quiet architecture holding everything together. Deeper still, the sea guided the soul toward a luminous horizon beneath the waves. It was not a place but an understanding. All currents led there, and none stayed long. The keeper of pauses waited at the threshold, still and shining. "You have learned to move, to wait, to offer, and to return," they said. Now you will learn to remain while still flowing. How can I remain and still move? Asked the soul. By becoming the motion itself. The keeper touched the soul's forehead. In that instant, the ocean opened not outward, but inward. The soul saw that every droplet contained the whole. It saw stars trembling in the deep. It saw the moon's silver face reflected in 1,000 ripples, each one whispering, "We remember." Then the sea lifted the soul higher, past coral spires and sand plains, and the long slow hymn of whales. The surface broke not as boundary but as revelation. The sky was endless and kind. The sun rose, wearing its light like forgiveness. "You have carried the deep," said the moon, pale even in day. "Now carry the dawn." The soul began to travel, not walking or swimming, but moving as presence moves, appearing wherever patience was needed. In a desert, a traveler lost his way. A cool breeze brushed his cheek, carrying the scent of salt and courage. In a city, a mother rocked her child who would not sleep. A rhythm entered her heart, the calm rise and fall of tide, and the child dreamed of oceans. In the mountains, a monk sat by a frozen stream. Beneath the ice, water whispered, "You are never truly still." The soul was all these moments and none of them, a gentle undercurrent threading through the world, reminding every living thing that eternity was near, breathing with them. And when storms rose, because they always rise, the soul was there too. It was the calm eye within the tempest, the reminder that even chaos moves according to music. One evening, long after sunsets had lost count of themselves, the soul found itself back at the Warden of Hours tower. The bell hung silent but awake. The hourglass of light continued its infinite conversation with gravity. The rope, the glass, the shell, all still there, their forms softened by weather, but their meaning intact. The soul touched the blue glass. It reflected sky and sea together, inseparable. It ran fingers along the rope, now part of the wind's own weaving. It lifted the shell, and it sang, not loudly, but with a sweetness that reached everything within reach of kindness. The archivist of slowness stood nearby, carving another spoon. "You came back," they said. "Always," replied the soul. "What have you learned?" "That eternity isn't the absence of change," said the soul. "It is the rhythm of returning." The archivist smiled. "Then you've joined the tide itself." "I have," said the soul. "But the tide is not mine. I am its echo." The archivist nodded. "Good. Echoes last longer than songs." Evening folded the island into dusk. The moon rose. The sea reached, then withdrew, reached, then withdrew, the language of everything that endures. The soul walked to the water's edge. Each step left no mark, only peace. "I will keep flowing," it whispered. "You already are," said the sea. "You are my remembering." The soul stepped forward, and for the last time, form dissolved into rhythm. It became the sea, the breath, the hush before dawn, the song beneath every silence. And so the tide of eternity moved, within and without. It became the whisper behind laughter, the patience in waiting hands, the stillness after storms. It lived in every kindness, every pause, every return. No ending, no beginning, only flow. And if you listen closely tonight, when the world quiets enough to hear its own breathing, you may sense it too. The pulse that has no name, the tide that never leaves, the soul that remembers light. Thank you for listening to Sleep with Myth.